Und Doku, wenn ihr da sein solltet, macht ja eine dumme Sprüche, Nachrichten löschen. Wenn einer was Antisemitisches postet, direkt weg damit. Da ist kein Bock mehr drauf. Keine Spielchen mehr, direkt weg. So, ich wechsle jetzt mal die Perspektive. Es sind, ups.
Herzlich willkommen alle miteinander. Schön, dass so viele dem Aufruf gefolgt sind. Ich verlese die Auflagen der heutigen Versammlung. Die Fußgänger dürfen nicht behindert werden und müssen passieren können. Die Lautstärke von Lautsprechern und Megafonen darf einen festgelegten Grenzwert von 90 Dezibel nicht überschreiten und die Versammlungsleitung ist für die Einhaltung verantwortlich. Musik darf nur begrenzt abgespielt werden, maximal 15 Minuten am Stück. Danach ist eine Pause von mindestens 5 Minuten vorgeschrieben. Zum Abschluss der heutigen Mahnwache singen wir gemeinsam die Hatikwa. Die Hoffnung ist die Nationalhymne Israels. Der Text drückt die 2000-jährige Sehnsucht des jüdischen Volkes aus, als freies Volk in Zion und Jerusalem zu leben.
Danke, Anti. Grüße zurück.
Hallo und guten Tag und herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass Sie alle gekommen sind und dem Aufruf gefolgt sind. Ich bin vom Iron Dome Hannover e.V. und ich fange einfach mal an. Mein Name ist Mirjam von Bodelschwing. Ich bin Jüdin mit Familie in Israel. Meine Eltern kamen aus Aschersleben und Liegnitz, heute Polen. Ich bin Mitbegründerin des Iron Dome Hannover e.V. und erste Vorsitzende des Iron Dome Hannover. Ich stehe hier heute als Jüdin, als Tochter dieser Geschichte, als Bürgerin dieses Landes. Und ich sage es klar und ohne jede Beschönigung. Was am 18. März 2026 hier in Hannover geschehen ist, war kein Vorfall. Es war ein Angriff. Ein Angriff auf uns, auf unsere Würde, auf unsere Erinnerung, auf unser Leben, auf mein Leben. Das Mahnmal für die ermordeten Juden wurde beschmiert. Mit antisemitischen Schriftzügen, mit Worten des Hasses, Worte, die wir kennen, die ich kenne, Worte, die eine Geschichte tragen, eine Geschichte von Entrechtung, Entwürdigung, Verfolgung und Mord. Und ich frage Sie alle, haben die Täter wirklich nichts gelernt? So gar nichts? Das ist kein Einzelfall, das ist kein Ausrutscher. Das ist das Ergebnis eines Klimas. Ein Klima, in dem Judenhass wieder sagbar geworden ist. In dem es sich tarnt als Kritik, als Aktivismus, als Solidarität. Aber am Ende bleibt er das, was er immer war. Judenhass. Am 18. März wurde nicht nur ein Denkmal beschmiert. Es wurde ein Signal gesendet. Ihr seid hier nicht sicher. Wir sind hier nicht sicher. Und was ist die Antwort dieser Stadt? Zu oft die gleichen hohlen Phrasen, immer wieder. Herr Onay sagte gestern, Rassismus und Antisemitismus haben keinen Platz in dieser Stadt. Das ist Denken in einer Kultur der Opferkonkurrenz. Denn es geht nicht um Rassismus. Es geht um Juden in Deutschland. Und daher geht es ganz allein um Antisemitismus. Die Verurteilung der Täter blieb aus. Wann stellen Sie sich, Herr Onay, wann stellen Sie sich einmal auf die Straße gegen die Intifadas und erleben diesen Hass? Als Oberbürgermeister haben Sie die Pflicht, jüdische Bürger zu schützen. Als die Moscheen beschmiert wurden, haben sich alle jüdischen Gemeinden von der Tat distanziert. Ich erwarte eine solche Reaktion der Distanzierung von den muslimischen Gemeinden jetzt auch. Es wird Zeit, den Dialog mit den Moscheengemeinden zum Thema Antisemitismus zu suchen. Nur zum Fastenbrechen gehen ist nicht genug. Es wird Zeit, nach der Verankerung des Schutzes jüdischen Lebens als Staatsziel in der niedersächsischen Verfassung muss die Novellierung des Hochschulgesetzes zum Schutz jüdischer Studentinnen und Studenten und Lehrender vor dem antisemitischen Mob an den Universitäten. Es wird Zeit, dass die Kirchen sich einmischen und sich unmissverständlich an die Seite von Jüdinnen und Juden stellen. Ich höre die Rufe auf den Straßen, auch hier in Hannover. Intifada, ein Wort, das Gewalt meint. Ein Wort, das für viele von uns nicht politisch ist, sondern existenziell. Wenn solche Parolen gerufen werden, dann geht es nicht um Frieden, dann geht es um Einschüchterung, um Ausgrenzung, um Hass und Hetze. Es beginnt mit dem Hass auf Israel, geht weiter mit Schmierereien auf dem Mahnmal. Was kommt als nächstes? Und ich frage, wo bleibt der breite, unmissverständliche politische Widerstand? Wo und wann wird endlich gehandelt? Stimmen, die sagen, bis hierhin und nicht weiter. Stattdessen erleben wir politische Beschlüsse, etwa von Die Linke Niedersachsen, bei denen man sich zumindest fragen muss, welche Botschaften werden hier ausgesendet? Wird hier wirklich klar genug zwischen legitimer, sachlicher Kritik und antisemitischen Narrativen unterschieden? Oder wird ein Klima geschaffen, in dem sich Täter nicht nur bestärkt, sondern legitimiert fühlen? Diese Taten sind nicht zu legitimieren, denn in Deutschland werden Jüdinnen und Juden aufgrund der Politik von Netanyahu verantwortlich gemacht. Es ist etwa so, als würden in Deutschland Musliminnen und Muslime wegen der Politik von Erdogan diskriminiert werden. Die Ursachen beider rassistischer und antisemitischer Angriffe liegen jedoch grundsätzlich woanders. Worte haben Konsequenzen. Politische Beschlüsse haben Konsequenzen. Schweigen hat Konsequenzen. Und wenn Sie diese Zusammenhänge nicht benennen, dann machen Sie sich mitschuldig. Antisemitismus kommt heute nicht nur mit Glatze und Springerstiefeln. Er kommt gebildet daher, aktivistisch, moralisch aufgeladen. Und genau das macht ihn so gefährlich. Ich habe keine Geduld und Kraft mehr für Relativierungen. Ich habe keine Geduld mehr für dieses Ja, aber. Nein, es gibt kein Aber, wenn ein Mahnmal für ermordete Juden und Jüdinnen beschmiert wird. Es gibt nur eine Antwort. Klare Verurteilung, klare Konsequenzen, klare Haltung. Für mich ist dieses Mahnmal kein Stein. Es ist ein Grab, ein Ort, an dem wir den Toten ihre Würde zurückgeben wollen. Und selbst das wird uns jetzt genommen. Was sagt das über uns als Gesellschaft? Ich stehe hier und ich sage, ich habe Angst. Ja, aber ich bin auch wütend und ich bin entschlossen. Denn wir und ich werden nicht wieder leise werden. Wir werden nicht wieder unsichtbar werden. Wir werden nicht wieder gehen. Diese Stadt und dieses Land gehört auch uns. Und wenn Menschen dieses Mahnmal beschmieren, dann beschmieren sie nicht nur einen Stein. Sie beschmieren das Fundament unserer Demokratie. Und deshalb sage ich, es reicht. Es reicht mit dem Wegsehen. Es reicht mit dem Beschwichtigen. Es reicht mit der falschen Neutralität. Wer jetzt nicht klar Stellung bezieht, der steht nicht in der Mitte. Der steht auf der falschen Seite. Die Frage ist nicht mehr, ob wir handeln müssen. Die Frage ist, warum habt ihr so lange gewartet? Warum schweigt die Politik und die Stadtgesellschaft? Hiermit wollte ich eigentlich enden, aber wir haben eine Anfrage an den Bürgermeister gestellt, ob er heute hierher kommt. Und es gab eine Absage. Die Absage zur Teilnahme des Oberbürgermeisters wegen einer Ratssitzung erreicht uns heute mit den Worten: Wir wünschen eine schöne Veranstaltung. Lieber Herr Ohney, ich kann nur sagen, geht's noch? Möglich wäre auch gewesen, die Ratssitzung kurz zu unterbrechen, hier teilzunehmen und die Ratssitzung anschließend fortzusetzen. Das hätte ich kümmern genannt. Gut, dann rufe ich jetzt Nirit Cordes, Ehrenmitglied des Iron Dome Hannover, gerade eben frisch zurückgekehrt aus Israel.
Ich komme unvorbereitet, weil ich auf das hier nicht vorbereitet war, aber ich bin auch nicht überrascht. Und ich kann nicht sagen, ob es von links, rechts, aus der bürgerlichen Mitte kommt oder von muslimisch-islamistischer Seite. Egal was es ist, und ich weiß auch jetzt schon, dass es nicht aufgeklärt wird, alles ist heute möglich. Ich bin gebürtige Hannoveranerin. Ich spreche hier als Hannoveranerin an die Stadt Hannover. Es ist ein Monat her, dass hier Schüler der Sophienschule standen und gesagt haben, wer in der Gegenwart schläft, wacht in der Vergangenheit auf. Deutschland schläft schon wieder. Es ist Tradition, dass man erst in der Gegenwart sieht, was in der Vergangenheit sieht, was in der Gegenwart passiert. Ist das Tradition für Deutschland? Ich weiß, es gibt viele gute einzelne Menschen, auch in Deutschland selbstverständlich, die alle entsetzt und bestürzt sind und auf unserer Seite sind. Einzelne Stimmen. Auf Hebräisch, da heißen diese Menschen Chassidei Olam Ha'umot. Das sind diese Menschen, die damals Jüdinnen und Juden versteckt haben. Auf eigene Gefahr hin. Immer nur im Einzelfall. Wo ist die Masse? Wo ist Hannover? Vor 3 Wochen stand ich hier mit Caroline Preisler, mit dem Iron Dome Hannover, mit Mana Iran, und in meiner Ansprache habe ich gesagt, Antisemitismus nicht in meiner Stadt, nicht in Hannover. Und jetzt ist es gar kein Problem. Wo sind die Politiker? Wo ist die Bevölkerung? Wo ist das Entsetzen? Ich ende mit diesen Fragen und bleibe ratlos. Und meine Kinder werden nicht in Deutschland leben. Wir haben uns alle als Familie schon verabschiedet. Nein, danke.
Ich darf jetzt begrüßen Uta Sänger, Omas gegen Rechts.
Vielen Dank, Vera. Liebe Freundinnen, liebe Freunde, heute hat in Aalen eine Gedenkveranstaltung an die Opfer nationalsozialistischer Zwangsarbeit in Hannover erinnert. Am ehemaligen Hinrichtungsort wurde ein Kranz niedergelegt. Und jetzt stehen wir hier entsetzt an diesem Mahnmal, das gestern mit antisemitischen Hassparolen verschmiert wurde. Ein Ort, der an die Deportationen und Ermordung von Jüdinnen und Juden aus Hannover erinnert. Ein Ort, der für Erinnerung steht, für Namen, für Menschen. Und genau diese Namen wurden durchgestrichen. Das ist keine Sachbeschädigung, das ist ein Angriff auf Erinnerung. Ein Angriff auf die Würde der Opfer und ein Angriff auf die Menschen, die heute in dieser Stadt jüdisch leben. Wer Namen auslöscht, will Geschichte auslöschen. Wer solche Parolen hinterlässt, will Angst verbreiten. Und deshalb stehen wir hier, nicht zum ersten Mal. Und leider auch nicht, weil es ein Einzelfall wäre. Antisemitismus ist kein Randphänomen. Er zeigt sich offen auf Mauern, auf Straßen, in Parolen. Er zeigt sich laut, in Sprechchören, die Gewalt verherrlichen. Und er zeigt sich leise, in Relativierungen, im Wegsehen, im Schweigen. Und wenn auf unseren Straßen Intifada gebrüllt wird. Wenn Jüdinnen und Juden sich fragen müssen, ob sie sich hier noch sicher fühlen können. Da geht es nicht um Meinungen, da geht es um Bedrohung. Und das müssen wir klar benennen. Unser Oberbürgermeister Belit Onay hat gesagt, der Kampf gegen Antisemitismus ist eine gemeinsame Aufgabe. Und eine gemeinsame Aufgabe heißt auch, nicht wegsehen, wenn antisemitische Parolen fallen. Nicht schweigen, wenn sie relativiert werden. Nicht ausweichen, wenn es unbequem wird. Gemeinsame Aufgabe heißt auch, sichtbar sein, so wie heute hier. Wir stehen seit vielen Jahren an der Seite der jüdischen Gemeinden in dieser Stadt. 2 Jahre lang haben wir jeden Freitag während des Schabbat-Gottesdienstes vor der Synagoge gestanden. Still, sichtbar, verlässlich, als Zeichen. Solidarität zeigt sich nicht in Worten allein. Sie zeigt sich darin, ob man kommt, ob man bleibt, ob man wiederkommt. Heute sind wir hier gemeinsam mit der Initiative Iron Dome und der deutsch-israelischen Gesellschaft. Das ist gut, denn genau so entsteht das, was wir brauchen. Eine breite, verlässliche Zivilgesellschaft, die klar ist in ihrer Haltung. Aber wir müssen auch ehrlich sein. Es reicht nicht, nur zu reagieren. Wir müssen widersprechen, früher, klarer, konsequenter. Wenn antisemitische Narrative sich verbreiten, wenn Täter-Opfer-Umkehr geschieht, wenn Judenhass sich hinter politischen Parolen versteckt. Antisemitismus hat viele Gesichter. Er kommt von rechts, er kommt von links, er kommt aus der Mitte der Gesellschaft. Und er kommt oft getarnt. Deshalb braucht es Aufmerksamkeit und Haltung. Dieses Mahnmal erinnert an Menschen, die entrechtet, verfolgt und ermordet wurden. Nicht irgendwann, nicht irgendwo, sondern hier aus Hannover. Die Namen, die hier stehen, gehören zu dieser Stadt und sie gehören zu uns. Wer sie durchstreicht, stellt sich gegen genau das, was dieses Mahnmal bedeutet. Und wir sagen, das lassen wir nicht stehen. Wir stehen hier für die Erinnerung, für die, die deportiert wurden, für die, die heute hier leben. Solidarität heißt, wir sehen dich, wir sehen euch, wir stehen an eurer Seite und wir widersprechen dem Hass. Nicht irgendwann, sondern jetzt und immer wieder. Danke.
Ich begrüße nun Dr. Gerhard Wegner, niedersächsischer Landesbeauftragter gegen Antisemitismus und für den Schutz jüdischen Lebens, Mitglied und Beisitzer vom Iron Dome Hannover e.V. Vielen Dank, dass Sie heute da sind.
Ja, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde, ich bin niedersächsischer Landesbeauftragter gegen Antisemitismus und für den Schutz jüdischen Lebens hier in Niedersachsen. Und ich bin, du hast es eben schon gesagt, auch Mitglied hier bei Eindom. Ich bin das ganz bewusst, weil ich möchte nicht nur Reden halten und irgendwelche schönen Worte machen. Davon gibt es unendlich viel und unendlich viele Sachen. Ich möchte mit dazu beitragen, dass wir aktiv gegen Antisemitismus vorgehen. Und dazu gehört auch, dass wir uns hier auf unseren Plätzen in Hannover versammeln und gemeinsam demonstrieren für die Rechte von Jüdinnen und Juden gegen Antisemitismus, ganz egal, wie er auftaucht. Das ist ganz entscheidend. Und ich hoffe und wünsche, dass wir hier immer mehr Menschen werden, die sich in dieser Hinsicht hier versammeln. Diese Schmiererei hier hinter mir, das ist schäbig, das ist feige, das ist gemein, sowas zu machen. Es ist ein Anschlag auf uns alle, auf das, was unter uns gilt und was unter uns wichtig ist. Und dazu gehört die Erinnerung an das maßloseste Verbrechen, was es in der Geschichte der Menschheit je gegeben hat, den Holocaust, die Shoah, die wir alle im Kopf haben und mit der unsere Eltern und Großeltern noch verwickelt gewesen sind, wo sie Täter waren und Menschen vernichtet haben. Daran erinnert dieses Mahnmal hinter mir. Und das zu beschmieren und da über die Namen der Opfer hinwegzuschmieren, ist eine unglaubliche Geste, die hier angewendet wird. Wer so etwas macht, wer so etwas beschmiert, der stellt sich außerhalb unserer Gemeinschaft hier in unserem Land. Der gehört bestraft dafür mit allem, was es an Möglichkeiten dafür gibt. Dieser Anschlag hier auf das Mahnmal steht aber auch in einem Kontext. Und der Kontext besteht darin, dass Antisemitismus sich in unserem Land ausgebreitet hat in den letzten Jahren, und zwar rapide aufgebreitet hat und offensichtlich kaum zu stoppen ist. Karl Schweigmann-Greve hat von einem antisemitischen Coming-out in unserem Land gesprochen. Das klingt so ein bisschen lustig, aber es ist überhaupt nicht lustig, sondern es beschreibt genau das, worum es im Augenblick geht. Es äußern sich offensichtlich immer mehr Menschen antisemitisch, fühlen sich darin ein Recht zu haben, sich so äußern zu können und vertreten das in der Öffentlichkeit. Ich bin kürzlich auf einen guten alten Freund gestoßen, den ich lange kenne, mit dem ich früher auch zusammengearbeitet habe, der mir dann erzählte, was für Verbrechen die Juden in Israel begehen würden. Und als ich ihn dann darauf hingewiesen habe, was das für eine unmögliche Sprache ist und Redewendung ist, und ihn darauf hinwies, unter welchen schwierigen Lebensbedingungen Jüdinnen und Juden hier bei uns im Land mittlerweile leben und dass sie Angst haben müssen, da hat er nur schlicht gesagt, ja, dann sind sie doch selbst schuld daran. Man muss sich sowas mal vorstellen. Und das ist eine Person gewesen, eine gebildete Person gewesen, die eine öffentliche Position bekleidet hat, bis sie dann in Ruhestand gegangen ist. Keine Spur von Einsicht in dieser Hinsicht. Und sowas öffentlich zu sagen, ist frech und ist unglaublich, aber ist ein Zeichen dafür, wo wir mittlerweile in unserem Land hingekommen sind. Und der Höhepunkt in dieser Hinsicht ist meiner Meinung nach der Beschluss der Linkspartei vom Wochenende gewesen. Ich bin sauer und wütend über diesen Beschluss, aber ich bin auch ehrlich gesagt unheimlich traurig darüber, dass so ein Beschluss in der Linkspartei gefasst worden ist. Denn eigentlich habe ich persönlich nichts gegen diese Partei. Im Gegenteil, ich finde, dass die Linkspartei zur Demokratie in Deutschland eigentlich beiträgt. Aber mit solchen Beschlüssen betreibt sie genau das Gegenteil. Die desavouiert sich selbst und bringt sich im Ansehen in der Bevölkerung runter. Und das finde ich persönlich traurig. Das schadet nämlich nicht nur der Linkspartei, es schadet uns allen, es schadet der Demokratie in unserem Land. Denn was macht denn die Linkspartei mit solch einem Beschluss? Das ist ja nicht nur harmlos mal so irgend so ein Beschluss, irgend so eine Meinung. Eine Partei fasst so einen Beschluss, weil sie doch Wählerstimmen gewinnen will, weil sie Wahlen gewinnen will. Das heißt, die Linkspartei will mit Antisemitismus Wahlen gewinnen. Mit öffentlichem Antisemitismus will sie Menschen für sich gewinnen. Sie spekuliert darauf, dass Menschen sie wählen, weil sie antisemitisch ist und weil sie selbst, die Menschen, vielleicht auch antisemitisch sind. Das ist etwas, was wir bisher so in Deutschland noch nie gehabt haben. Das ist eine öffentliche Ermutigung zum Antisemitismus, die sich gewaschen hat. Und ich hoffe sehr, dass das nicht die fürchterlichen Folgen hat, die das haben könnte. Also wir müssen höllisch aufpassen und wir müssen die Freunde aus der Linkspartei dringend ermahnen, dass sie auf ihrem Bundesparteitag diese Sache zurücknehmen und nicht weiter betreiben, sondern sich klar von entsprechenden Beschlüssen distanzieren. Denn der Antisemitismus, der jetzt hier auch in dem Beschluss deutlich wird, in Deutschland richtet sich und das ist in den letzten Jahren immer mehr geworden, richtet sich vor allen Dingen auf Israel selbst. Das ist der sogenannte israelbezogene Antisemitismus, über den wir hier reden. Dieser Antisemitismus, der sich auf Israel redet, findet in Deutschland gewaltige Zustimmung mittlerweile. Wenn Sie in entsprechenden Umfragen gucken, dann können Sie sich wundern, etwa die Hälfte der Bevölkerung in Deutschland würde heute zustimmen, wenn man zum Beispiel sagt, dass Israel sich heute gegenüber den Palästinensern genauso benimmt, wie die Nazis sich gegenüber den Juden benommen haben. Das heißt, Israel wird in gewisser Hinsicht mit den Nazis gleichgesetzt. Bei vielen bei uns in der Bevölkerung, man kann das an vielen Stellen immer wieder hören. Und das ist genau das, worauf die Linkspartei jetzt spekuliert, auf dieses Wählerpotenzial, das sich mit solchen Aussagen breit macht. Und das hat keine Grenzen, das muss aber bekämpft, es muss eingegrenzt werden. Die Folgen von solchem Antisemitismus und die Folgen von solchen Beschlüssen sind klar. Es verbreitet sich die Unsicherheit für Jüdinnen und Juden bei uns im Land. Die Gewaltbereitschaft von einzelnen Menschen gegen Jüdinnen und Juden fühlt sich ermutigt durch solche Beschlüsse. Das ist der ganz fürchterliche Punkt, der dabei rauskommt. Es ist schon damals, als zum ersten Mal über den Genozid im Gazastreifen geredet wurde, so, dass auch das die Gefährdungslage für Jüdinnen und Juden bei uns ganz gewaltig erhöht hat. Das machen sich viele gar nicht klar, wenn sie leichtfertig über solche Sachen reden. Und man kann ja viel über die Situation im Gazastreifen reden. Uns geht es hier um die Gefährdung für Menschen, die bei uns hier leben. Und wir wollen, dass die Menschen hier bei uns leben bleiben können und nicht wegziehen müssen, dass Jüdinnen und Juden hier bei uns bleiben und in Sicherheit hier leben können. Weil nur dann leben wir auch alle in Sicherheit. Das ist der entscheidende Punkt. Wir müssen deswegen dafür sorgen, dass in unseren Institutionen und Einrichtungen hier bei uns im Land nicht nur vorsorgend etwas getan wird gegen Antisemitismus in der Bildung, an den Hochschulen und wo auch immer, sondern dass in allen großen gesellschaftlichen Bereichen auch aktiv jetzt gegen Antisemitismus vorgegangen wird. Deswegen kann ich hier nur vor allen Dingen die Universitäten und Hochschulen aufrufen, gezielt auch jetzt gegen Antisemitismus vorzugehen. Insbesondere die Hochschule Hannover kann da eine ganze Menge mehr machen, als sie bisher macht. Die Universität Hannover kann da eine Menge mehr machen, als sie bisher macht. Und das sollte sie auch tun. Und sie sollte sich deutlich dazu bekennen, auch hier auf solchen Veranstaltungen, wie wir sie hier heute machen. Aber nicht nur die Universitäten sind dazu aufgefordert, es sind die Kirchen dazu aufgefordert, es ist schon gesagt worden, es sind die Unternehmen, die Gewerkschaften, die zivilgesellschaftlichen Einrichtungen dazu aufgefordert, eben nicht nur Bildungsprozesse im Blick auf die Zukunft zu machen, sondern jetzt aktiv und hier gegen Antisemitismus Stellung zu beziehen, und sei es bei solchen Gelegenheiten wie hier. Das ist die Botschaft, die hier heute davon ausgehen muss. Und ich möchte euch allen, die ihr heute hier seid, herzlich danken, dass ihr heute Abend gekommen seid. Wir dürfen nicht nachlassen im Kampf gegen Antisemitismus, und wir müssen immer mehr Menschen gewinnen aus unserer Gesellschaft, die hier mit uns zusammen agieren und zusammenhalten. Und ich möchte an dieser Stelle auch noch mal eins sagen: Ich möchte auch Freunde aus dem palästinensischen Bereich ausdrücklich auffordern, nicht darauf zu setzen, dass das, was die Linkspartei zum Beispiel gemacht hat, ihnen zugutekommen würde, sondern sich davon zu distanzieren und mit uns gemeinsam gegen antidemokratisches Verhalten vorzugehen. Nur dann profitieren sie auch selbst davon, weil nur dann leben sie auch selbst in einer freien, demokratischen Gesellschaft, wie sich auch Palästinenserinnen und Palästinenser das natürlich wünschen. Im Grunde genommen gehören sie hiermit her und nicht gegen uns. Das ist ein ganz entscheidender Punkt, und hoffentlich kriegen wir in dieser Hinsicht in Zukunft auch ein paar mehr Fortschritte. Und nun danke ich euch allen und vielen Dank fürs Herkommen. Vielen Dank, und das wird jetzt jeder weiter.
Vielen, vielen Dank, Dr. Gerd Wegner. Dankeschön, dass Sie heute gekommen sind. Wir fahren fort mit Sarah Yazdani, Mitbegründerin von Mahner Iran, Mitglied und Beisitzerin beim Iron Dome Hannover e.V. Vielen Dank, Sarah.
Shalom, Dorut und Hallo. Vor 17 Jahren, als ich nach Hannover gekommen bin, hat mein Mann mich durch die Stadt geführt und mir verschiedene Orte in Hannover gezeigt. Zu denen gehört auch dieser Ort. Und ich habe diesen Ort immer mit Ehrfurcht gesehen, immer. Jedes Mal, als ich da vorbeigegangen bin, bin ich mir irgendwie, ja, ich kann das einfach so sagen, das ist mir schlecht geworden. weil ich immer daran denken musste, wie viele Menschen, die hier in dieser Stadt beheimatet waren, ihre Heimat verloren haben und weggehen mussten. Und ich habe mich ab und zu mal gefragt, sie waren gebürtige Deutsche. Und das ist ihnen sowas in Deutschland passiert. Und ich fragte mich ab und zu mal, wird mir auch sowas passieren als Migrantin? Und ich wurde auch oft gefragt, weil ich aus dem Iran komme, ob ich Juden hasse. Weil damals Ahmadinejad unser Präsident war und die ganze Welt kannte ihn. Und ich war immer überrascht, dass man mich immer gefragt hatte, ob ich die Juden hasse. Und ich habe immer gefragt, nein, ich habe gar kein Problem mit den Juden. Und das war immer präsent, immer. Weil das Regime im Iran sich das Ziel gesetzt hatte, Israel zu vernichten. Und für mich war das überraschend zu sehen, dass viele Deutsche dachten, dass wir IranerInnen Juden hassen und uns von unserem Regime nicht trennen konnten. Im Laufe der Zeit haben wir Iranerinnen und Iraner auch in Hannover bemerkt, dass interessanterweise, dass viele Menschen, die Bezug zum Israel hatten, die einzigen waren, die unsere Schmerzen verstehen konnten. Und das ist noch schlimmer zu sehen, dass es so ist, weil ich mich manchmal frage, wie man das auch vorher erwähnt hatte, wo sind unsere Politiker, wenn wir Probleme haben in dieser Stadt? Probleme, die uns alle treffen. Heute sind die Juden dran, morgen andere Migranten aus anderen Ländern, übermorgen, ich weiß es nicht, ein Deutscher, der nicht vielleicht so gut aussieht, den Normen nicht entspricht. Wir sind bald alle dran. Und das ist noch nicht eine Woche her, dass hier an diesem Ort 2 Hassdemonstrationen, eine Hassdemonstration von den Islamisten mit den Flaggen des Mullah-Regimes hier erlaubt wurde und direkt danach, 2 Stunden später, eine Kundgebung von Linksextremisten und dann kamen die Mullah-Anhänger auch dazu. Und ich frage mich, als Iranerin mit dieser Philosophie, gute Worte, gute Gedanken und gute Taten, die Worte sind schon da. Wann kommen die Taten? Und das muss uns alle wirklich zum Denken bringen, dass die Taten schon teilweise in Hannover stattfinden. Und bald wird es nicht mehr lustig für uns alle. Nur wenn wir zusammenhalten und endlich uns wehren, nicht im Sinne gewalttätig zu werden, sondern sichtbar zu sein, können wir unsere Existenz garantieren. In diesem Sinne, am Israel Chai.
So, nachdem 2 Redner jetzt noch nicht da sind, haben wir beschlossen, dass wir die Hatikwa vorziehen. Matthias, du wirst unser Vorsänger sein und Alexander, du machst Musik.
So, damit ihr mal seht, was hier gemacht wurde, ist es zum Teil schon wieder übersprüht worden und wieder übersprüht worden.
Ich danke allen, die heute gekommen sind. Ich hoffe, wir sehen uns das nächste Mal zu einem etwas besseren Anlass. Ich habe die Worte von Judith Cordes sehr, sehr, sehr berührt. Ich war den Tränen nahe und wir werden jetzt die Veranstaltung beenden und schließen und alle zusammen Am Israel Chai! Dankeschön.
So, mit den Worten verabschiede ich mich jetzt auch. Ich habe gesagt, ich rede hier nicht viel, denn was hier gesagt wurde und die Schmierereien am Mahnmal sagen leider genug. Und deswegen verabschiede ich mich für heute. Macht was Schönes und geht gegen Antisemitismus vor. Ganz wichtige Sache. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to our guests from all over the world, with a special welcome to the survivors and their families that are with us today. My name is Ronit, and it is truly heartwarming for me and for all of us at the Ghetto Fighters House Museum to see such a diverse and engaged audience here. We're grateful for your participation. Today, we gather for the third session of our Talking Memory series, Bridge Over Troubled Water, Solidarity and Civic Responsibility in Times of Crisis. We initiated this webinar series because we felt a strong need to come together, both locally and globally, after the events of October 7th. We wanted to find a theme that could help us respond to the challenges we all faced, and found solidarity to be the perfect theme to do that. The concept of solidarity, as we see it, is a beacon of hope and a symbol of resilience in the face of adversity. It is an honorable quality in people and communities that may not always come naturally, but is precisely what we need in times like this, the ability to be there for each other. I am honored to introduce today's program, Solidarity, a Vital Support System for Female Prisoners in Nazi Camps. Our speakers will shine light on instances of solidarity and compassion among female prisoners in Nazi camps during the Holocaust, raising questions about the connection between a shared sense of unity and the chance of survival. I hope this program will resonate with you in meaningful ways. The program is in partnership with the Remember the Women Institute, the Rabin Chair Forum at George Washington University, and the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center. Okay, so we are starting now, and I would like to invite Dr. Rochelle Seidel to give the opening remarks on the importance of discussing and researching the history of women and their unique experiences during the Holocaust. Dr. Seidel is the founder and executive director of Remember the Women Institute, which since 1997 has conducted research and cultural activities that contribute to including women in history, especially in Holocaust history. She is co-editor of Sexual Violence Against Jewish Women During the Holocaust and coordinator of the 2018 exhibition Violated Women in the Holocaust and Genocide, which was displayed in New York City galleries. She's the author or editor of 8 books and numerous books, chapters, and articles on Holocaust, and has lectured internationally on subject for more than 40 years. Rochelle.
Thank you, Ronit, and thank you to you and to Maydeen for inviting me. Remember the Women Institute is pleased to be a partner for this important online seminar, and I really appreciate the Ghetto Fighters House giving me the opportunity to present the opening remarks. For this program about solidarity, a vital support system for female prisoners in Nazi camps, I was asked to speak about the importance of researching and discussing the history of women and the Holocaust and their unique experiences, of course. Now, feminist artist Linda Stein, by coincidence, just recently asked me to be part of her event with feminist quotes for 2024. It's to give one sentence to include in her forthcoming exhibition. What I've come up with so far is, when women are truly equal to men, we will no longer need feminism. This might also describe how I began researching and writing about women in the Holocaust more than 30 years ago. It had become apparent to a small group of women Holocaust scholars, that the uniqueness of women's experiences had mainly been left out of early narratives of the Holocaust, which were almost all written by men. And including their stories gives us a broader and a deeper insight into the horrific circumstances of the Holocaust. And this is why it's so important to talk about women's experiences. To paraphrase my feminist quote, when women's experiences are truly incorporated into the history of the Holocaust, then we're not going to any longer need to focus only on women's stories. Perhaps we will no longer need organizations like Remember the Women Institute, which I founded 27 years ago, and then I can finally retire. But so far, that hasn't been the case. I'm going to try to briefly, very briefly, sum up the history of researching and discussing women in the Holocaust in just the few minutes that I have. The first symposium to address the subject did not take place until 1983, organized by Dr. Joan Ringelheim and Dr. Esther Katz. Now, this was some 20 years after there were Holocaust studies and women's studies in the United States. Finally, they began to come together. But we didn't have a core of academic books on the subject until late in the 1990s, although some women's memoirs were published much earlier. I see that Dr. Myrna Goldenberg is watching, and it was she and I did in the Scholars Conference on the Holocaust. I think it was 1997, it might have been 1998, something like this. We finally did something called Books in Print, Women in the Holocaust. So it was some time after, maybe it should have been. We could discuss various things. We could discuss women's biological issues such as menstruation and pregnancy, childbirth and abortion. We could discuss sexual violence and rape and sexual slavery. We could discuss the patriarchal system that women of the time grew up in. We could discuss difficulties with self-image and with hygiene. We could discuss shame. But for this presentation, we're talking about something positive, the solidarity of female prisoners in Nazi concentration camps. My own research was on Jewish women in Ravensbrück Women's Concentration Camp, which is a very good place to talk about and document women's experiences and solidarity. So let me just very quickly give you a few examples of solidarity among the women there. All of these activities I'm mentioning were intended to raise the spirits of the prisoners, and they were done in secret, of course, and there was harsh punishment if the women were caught. 2 Jewish political prisoners with different political views, Austrian Social Democrat Katie Leichter and German Communist Olga Benario Prestes, put aside their political ideologies, and together they created a clandestine newspaper. Olga also taught the women the geography of the war, and she even made a secret atlas, which has been preserved. Katie and another prisoner co-produced a secret play that mocked the Nazis. And political hostage Gemma LaGuardia Gluck, the sister of New York City Mayor Fiorella LaGuardia, taught English in her barrack. And there were so many gifts and so many birthday cards that were created in secret, and many of them are now preserved in the Memorial Archive of Ravensbrück and elsewhere. Sharing recipes, another activity that helped, was an activity of solidarity, and some of these recipe books have been preserved. This program is raising questions and offering some answers about the connection between a shared sense of unity and the chances of survival. We're going to hear about various instances of solidarity among women in more detail from our 2 speakers tonight, and I'm pleased that Dr. Mehek Bursa will tell us about solidarity among female prisoners, women's experiences in Nazi concentration camps, and Professor Yoel Yaari will discuss a specific kind of solidarity, helping with medical attention when needed. And it's very special that he's speaking about his own mother, Bella Hassan, a devoted imprisoned nurse in Birkenau. So I join all of you now to learn from both of them, and I thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. As Rochelle mentioned, our first speaker is Dr. Mehek Bursa. Dr. Bursa is a board member and the head of Global Holocaust and Religious Studies at the Global Center for Religious Research in Denver, as well as the program director of Holocaust Studies there. She also serves as a board member at Teach the Shoah, where she is involved with Holocaust storytelling and interfaith community connections. Her PhD thesis entitled Literary Representations of the Holocaust and Assessment, focuses on the gendered response to the Holocaust, exploring trauma, memory, and identity perspectives. As an assistant professor of English, she has taught in various colleges of the University of Delhi. She was selected scholar in residence for the East Gap Anti-Semitism workshop held in the University of Oxford, and she has both international and national publications. In addition, she is the communication manager in Strife blog and journal, based in the Department of War Studies in King's College in London, copy editor at the Journal of International Women's Studies at Bridgewater State University in Massachusetts, and an editorial board member of Digital Holocaust Studies at Sussex, England. Holding several adjunct positions internationally allow her to organize various international conferences. Dr. Bause, who is at the moment in New Delhi, and it's past midnight for her already, as she said, February 19th, we thank you very much for being here with us today, for staying up so late. She will explore various manifestations of solidarity among female prisoners in the concentration camps.
Thank you so much, Rona. Hello, everyone. And foremost, I would like to extend my gratitude to the esteemed organizers for their meticulous planning in orchestrating this intercontinental lecture. My presentation today will address the different manifestations of solidarity exhibited by women during ghettoization and later also in the concentration camps. This forms a small section of my PhD dissertation, wherein I have analyzed select memoirs and diaries through the theoretical prism of trauma theory and argued for having a gendered response to the Holocaust. Although much has been said by Rochelle, and I would still give you a brief overview of the unique place of women during the Holocaust. Gender existed as an invisible social reality ever since the development of the Holocaust literature, but was never discussed openly. While the Holocaust literature emerged, it was given a peripheral status in male narratives that were considered the touchstones of trauma for several decades. Women, instead of having a story of their own, existed only in the parts where the male protagonists wanted them to exist. And we find this even in the second generation narratives. For example, the most celebrated graphic novel, März, by Art Spiegelman. Throughout both the volumes, women are either excluded from the main narration or given a marginal status. When the son wants to learn about his mother, the father dismisses his query each time. Not only the narratives, but also the figures associated with the Holocaust pivoted around males. For instance, the most prominent figure of the living dead, called the Muselmaner, that gradually became a Holocaust metaphor, was defined as an anonymous mass of men. A few of the early texts written by female survivors, such as Gerda Wiesmann, Olga Yanglil, and Helena Berenbaum, either went unnoticed or quickly ran out of print. The scholarship on women and the Holocaust emanated in the later decades of the 20th century, especially the 1980s and 90s, due to the efforts of historians, many of whom are here with us today. This was also the time, as I argue in my thesis, when the definition of trauma underwent a change. From what was known to be a physical wound, trauma became a psychic wound, and along with the definition of PTSD, it was given a formal recognition in the DSM number 3. The mobilization of trauma theory into literary studies, coupled with the second and third wave of feminism happening around that time, that concerned with the issues of equality of women, consciousness raising, and identity, became the backdrop for the women's scholarship to emerge. And then a 2-day conference on women surviving the Holocaust, held at Stern College on March 28, 1983, provided the launching pad. And two other books that I've referred to in my thesis. One is the 1998, edited by Professor Delia, Offer, and Leonore Wietzman, who is here with us today. And then 2013, Different Horrors and Same Hell, edited by Myrna Goldenberg and Amy Shapiro, marked another watershed moments. And as I argue in my dissertation, women narratives of the Holocaust provide a unique intersection where traumatic lacuna meets language as the trauma is narrativized in its belatedness. Subsequently, a focus on gender in the Holocaust studies reveals an insight into a hazier side, something which is useful in illuminating the richness of the domain as we become more attentive towards a fuller understanding of the Holocaust. And analyzing the research on gender reveals that in some cases, women even had better chances of survival, owing to better sabotage strategies and survival strategies. And if one were to analyze the force behind these better strategies, it was for sure solidarity. Now, what triggered this bond of solidarity? One of the strongest factors contributing to this bond of solidarity was the shared traumatic experiences of women, both during the ghettos and in the concentration camp. During the ghettoization, Jewish men were the first to be arrested due to their obvious physical features. Women thus were left alone to fend with the responsibilities of feeding their families. They thus juggled with two roles, occupational breadwinner and the domestic role of the caretaking. After the establishment of the concentration camps, the traumatic aspects became multifold for women. It included vulnerability to rape, humiliation, sexual exchange, fear of talking about pregnancy, abortion, pain, and fear of being separated from their men. If it can be termed in one phrase, then it can be said that they faced with choiceless choices, a term that was pioneered by Lawrence Langer, who passed away last month. May his memory be a blessing. This trauma of choiceless choices began right since their arrival on the Juden ramp, when they were segregated from their male counterparts. Those who were pregnant or seemed unhealthy or weak were immediately sent to gas chambers along with their children. Those women who were selected for work were first forcibly made to undress and stand naked in front of the male guards, while they were shaved all over and then tattooed with numbers. For religious Jewish women, who after marriage kept their hair covered in public, this was a spiritual assault. Oftentimes, even the private parts of women were searched to ensure that they were not hiding any item of utility or any vegetable that would aid them in any way. There was also an all-women's camp called the Ravensbrück concentration camp, which was infamously known as Hitler's hell for women. The women used in experiments in the camp were often unable to walk due to an injury caused due to a certain tendon, ligament, or a spinal nerve of lower limbs. As they hopped in the camp, they were commonly referred to as rabbits of Ravensbrück. There was also a torture room kept for women. If caught stealing, unlike their male counterparts, punishment for women was also double-fold. It included raping after undergoing the whipping torture. A typical whipping torture consisted of lashes on the private parts till they bled. Deprived of every ounce of comfort, the women became what Sybil Milton in the book Different Voices calls Schmuckstück, or trinkets or pieces of jewelry. Women were also employed in the camp brothels that were constructed in 10 camps by Heinrich Himmler. And these camps served as incentives intended to encourage the male prisoners in order to improve their work efficiency. The act took place every evening between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. in the Sonderboten, the special building. As many as 200 women were employed to work, in such brothels, and they were commonly nicknamed as dolls. Already living in double jeopardy, both as women and as Jews, these additional traumatic factors for female prisoners attributed to a corrosion of self, to such an extent that the women stopped feeling humiliated, and they no longer regarded themselves as human. Thus, in a way, the Nazis attacked what Professor David Patterson calls the Jewish soul. As a biological basis is the Jewish mother, correspondingly, an attack on the Jewish mother represents an attack on the fundamental essence of the Jewish soul. Solidarity among women in the Nazi camps provided various forms of support and resilience. It fostered a sense of community and shared identity, which helped the women not only emotionally, but also physically and even psychologically. These manifestations of solidarity can be seen in the doctor-patient bonds, foster families, stitching together, indulging in creative arts, sharing recipes, and their roles as resistors, the most daring ones being their roles as cashariots. These worked not only as cathartic catalysts to foster bonds of strength amongst the female prisoners, but also served as beacons of hope to survive in adversity. The lives of women doctors in the camps were exceptionally tough as they were confronted with profound ethical dilemmas on a daily basis. Dr. Gisela Perl, who was chosen by Joseph Mengele to operate a hospital ward in Auschwitz, risked her life to save the countless women by performing abortions to prevent them from being sent to the gas chambers. She treated them with her voice and would often tell them beautiful stories. And when she thought it was Rosh Hashanah, she even made a party with bread, cheese, and filthy leftover sausages. Dr. Lucelle Adelsberger, another physician who was deported to Auschwitz and Ravensbrück, provided medical care to the prisoners. In her memoir, A Doctor's Story, she describes her extreme and harrowing conditions prevalent in the camps and how she offered her expertise amidst the dire conditions. Another example is of the midwife, Stanislava Lezinska. She was a Polish midwife and was interned for 2 years in Auschwitz. She was ordered to murder the babies, but she refused and delivered over 3,000 babies and even provided care for their mothers. Her only tools were a pair of scissors and a handful of aspirin tablets, handed each day. She thus created living miracles of life in a death camp. Thus, while doctors like Joseph Mengele chose to go against the biomedical ethics, people like Gisela, Lucelle, and Stanislava upheld the Hippocratic oath as healers and chose to provide medical care to their fellow prisoners by risking their own lives. Deprived of their familial bonds, women often formed foster families in the camps. One such example is of Mala Zimmetbaum, who assumed the role of a surrogate mother and helped everybody who came to her. Mala became the number 19880 in Auschwitz and was appointed as an interpreter, owing to her proficiency in more than 7 languages. She used this privilege to devote herself completely to help the inmates and even sneaked medication and food for them. Sometimes she also wrote to her friend inquiring about the family. The accounts of her death vary, as she was the first Jewish woman who escaped the Auschwitz, but was later recaptured and executed. Another example is of Lucelle Eichengreen, with whom I was fortunate enough to have communicated. She was imprisoned in several concentration camps, including Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Born as Cecilia Lindau, Lucelle ended up marrying Dan Eichengreen, who turned out to be the son of Julie and Julius, Lucelle's foster family in the Lodz ghetto. Gradually, they bonded well, and Lucelle revealed to him the details of his parents. She finally found somebody whom she could trust. And for Lucelle, their marriage was the basis for normal life, something that she had always wished for but was missing. These makeshift families provided emotional support, protection, and most importantly, gave them a sense of belonging. Despite the camp conditions, some women formed bonds of camaraderie and mutual aid through sewing. Dr. Judy Bommel-Schwartz, who studied the behavior of men and women in the Canada Commando, notices a stark difference. Among the items of clothing to be sorted out, there were fur coats. While male prisoners would usually rip the lining and seams of the coat so that it would come apart, the few surviving women whom Judy interviewed did not use this tactic. They inserted handwritten notes into the coat's pockets that would usually read, "Hey, German woman, you know that you're wearing a coat that belonged to a woman who has been gassed and sent to Auschwitz." They would thus use the technique of psychological sabotage instead of the physical sabotage by men. Some women who used needles made out of wooden splinters and threads pulled out of blankets stitched Sioux symbols, sometimes even religious symbols, into their clothing as a way to assert their identity. Sometimes they would create subtle alterations that would enable them to conceal contraband items, such as food or medicine. Some even learned to iron their shirts using heated bricks in the stove. There were also women who were specially employed in Auschwitz to make elite garments for the Nazis. Dr. Lucy Aldington, in her book, The Dressmakers of Auschwitz, talks about this fashion workshop called the Upper Tailoring Studio that employed 25 seamstresses. For the employed women, it was not just a means of escaping the gas chambers, but also a place that fostered solidarity by weaving the threads of family and friendship. Despite the horrendous conditions they faced, some women managed to organize clandestine artistic endeavors as a form of resistance and to maintain their humanity amidst the horrors. It included poetry gatherings and dance sessions, and some women were also a part of the women's orchestra in Auschwitz. The SS officer, Maria Mandel, besides her brutal nature, found a fascination for beauty and music, which led her to establish a women's orchestra in Auschwitz. The orchestra required a significant organizational effort, including obtaining instruments and sheet music, which was conveniently resourced from the possessions of deportees arriving at the camp. Despite Maria's haphazard recruitment process and her brutality, the orchestra provided a means of solidarity and solace for the women employed. A similar bond was found among the dancers in the Nazi camps. A well-known example is of the dancing angel, Helena Wernroch, whose dancing skills saved her life twice. She wears a blue sweater every Passover, which was gifted to her by a friend who was employed in knitting sweaters for the Nazis in the Lodz ghetto. She is the subject of the film Fascination by Karen Goldfarb, and I'm again fortunate enough to be in touch with her and discuss aspects about her life. There were also instances where women found a shared interest in poetry and would often get together and recite them. And thanks to Pat Binder's online art project, Voices from Ravensbrück, that started in 2000, it is said that at least 1,200 poems were written in Ravensbrück. The thematic focus of all these poems, in general, was arrival, roll call, daily life, longing, suffering, and sometimes hope. In some cases, they were not even complete poetry. They were just fragmented rhymes, expressing sorrows of the camp, their dull existence, and a hope for liberation. Another example is Bosna, Zdonek, a camp prisoner of Auschwitz and Ravensbrück. She managed to carry a notebook with manuscripts of camp poems through both the concentration camps. The original manuscript was handed over to the Auschwitz Museum by her son, Adam, and the notebook was reprinted by the museum last year in 2023. These secret creative activities not only served as a form of solidarity, but also as a subtle form of cultural resistance. These brief moments provided a brief respite from the brutality of everyday life in the camps and allowed prisoners to connect with each other through shared experiences and emotions. Hunger was a constant companion in the concentration camps. While men, after stealing food from the larder, needed to take care of just themselves, the same task was more cumbersome for women, as apart from themselves, they had their foster families to take care of. Stretching the scraps of food resulted in innovative recipes, such as heating the potato peels directly on fire and eating them with salt. Such activities happened usually at night after the barrack guards had slept. Interestingly, the women in the camps also discussed food recipes as a pastime, and a famous recipe that circulated among them was making salads from weeds. A compilation of camp recipes can be found in the book In Memory's Kitchen that was compiled by Mina Patcher during her stay in Theresienstadt. Before her death, Mina entrusted her notebook to a friend in order to take it to her daughter Rami, which unfortunately took around 2 decades. It was finally published in 1996 with the help of Bianca Brown as the translator. The second edition of the book was published in 2006. Though it's not a cookbook in a real sense, because many recipes are missing and incomplete, but it surely is a Holocaust document signifying psychological resistance. Another cookbook called Ravensbrück Cookbook was assembled by Edith Peer, a survivor of the Ravensbrück camp, and is currently housed at Sydney Jewish Museum, where it is displayed among the other museum artifacts. Edith, who was employed in the Ravensbrück office, had access to pen and paper, and thus she utilized it completely. She used to sit beside the elder women for hours and collect their recipes. Along with her additional notes, she donated the cookbook to the museum in 1996. So talking, cooking, and sharing recipes served as a means of psychological resistance among the women, as they were spiritually nourishing for them, though not. The most motivating act of resistance of women in the concentration camp was their function as Kesharites. The name has Hebrew origins, where kesher means connection. Indeed, these women were the connecting links to the outside world. Concealed as non-Jews, they transported documents, papers, currencies, and ultimately arms and ammunition across the borders and into the ghettos. And they are even called human radium. Along with transporting the documents, they also instilled hope in the otherwise hopeless lives of the Jews inside the ghettos and camps. The 3 major reasons that only women were chosen as Keshariots were their physical features, their fluency in Polish language, and their excellent sixth sense. Referring to the role of courier girls, Ringelblum, in his work Notes from the Warsaw Ghetto, remarks that they are a theme that calls for a pen of a great writer. Once the Nazis accelerated the extermination of the Jews with the Action T4 and the Final Solution policy, the Keshariots gained another significant role. They became the informers of this policy and spread the message of mass annihilation to as many ghettos as possible. Owing to them, the ghetto leaders were able to devise escape plans and strategize beforehand. And examples of such women include Zivia Lubetkin, Edina Blady-Schwieger, and Frumka Plotnica. Zivia Lubetkin, a prominent Jewish resistant, fighter, took up the roles of heading resistance units during the uprisings. She played a crucial role in organizing resistance activities, including smuggling weapons and distributing underground papers. She was also one of the 3 commanders included in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and later also served as an important witness in the Eichmann trial in 1961. Irina Vladi-Schwieger was another courageous pediatrician who played a crucial role as a cashier. She not only managed to save the young lives in the children's hospital in the Warsaw Ghetto with scraps of food, medicine, and injections, but also took part in transporting guns and ammunition from those who sold or provided to where it was needed the most. Fromka Plotnica, who was one of the most informed and traveled couriers, was given the nickname of the Mema, the mother in Yiddish. And indeed, she was a devoted mother to all the Jews who came to her asking for help. Agnes Grunwald-Speyer, in her book, Women's Experiences in the Holocaust, in Their Own Voices, has written extensively on the Jewish courier girls. She was generous enough to lend me a review copy of her book, and my review is published in an Indian journal. Thus, it was these bonds of solidarity that transformed the embers of hope into flames of survival. And although I know it's just the tip of an iceberg, but with this, my presentation comes to an end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bause, so much for an enlightening talk. Can you say a word about what happened after the war? How did solidarity continue to shape survivors' lives post-liberation?
That's interesting. And we do have a couple of extensions, even during post-war. For instance, as I mentioned, Lucille Eichengreen, she found normalcy in her marriage. And that normalcy in her marriage was based on her foster family that she had found. Helena, another, she was a dancer and she found true liberation. She continued her solidarity in dancing, and then she found her true liberation. And today also, on her every birthday, she dances. And then there were doctors who remained human during inhumane times. They continued to do so. They continue to serve their professions. So solidarity after liberation also existed. Yes.
Thank you. And I would like to take the term and the idea and the story of the kasheriot as a transition into our next talk. As Dr. Bause said, kasheriot comes from the word kesher, which means connection, and this relates directly to our discussion. These young girls, somewhere as young as 15 years old, served as lifelines, as you just said, between communities. So while most of the time they were lonely, they were on their own, totally untrained, constantly in danger, inside, outside, and outside the ghetto walls. But so at the same time that they did this work on their own, they also made the connections and played crucial role collectively in resisting the Nazi occupation. What you added into their experiences in the camps is very interesting. And their stories were really so daring, but many were left untold. Today, we are fortunate to have Professor Yoel Yaari here to share the unique story that we are, again, fortunate enough to know about, the story of Bela Chazan, who served as a courier in Vilna, Grodno, Bialystok, Warsaw, and other places. She was later deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, and Professor Yaari will explore her remarkable demonstrations of devotion, sisterhood, and solidarity as she cared for patients in the Jewish ward. Professor Yaari is a researcher in neurodegenerative diseases in the Hebrew University Faculty of Medicine in Jerusalem. He published numerous articles on basic molecular and cellular mechanism of brain function and neurological diseases, particularly epilepsy. In 2017, he began his journey investigating Holocaust-related topics, focusing on the accounts of Jewish women that served as couriers. He published several articles on public media about the contribution of these women to anti-Nazi Jewish resistance. His documentary book, Portrait of a Woman, is expected to be released this forthcoming spring by an Israeli publisher, Kinneret Zmora Bitan. Yoel.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this respected forum. And I would like to start my presentation with a dedication. Let me see if it works. Yeah, I would like to dedicate my talk to Major Issachar Natan. He was my son-in-law. He died in Gaza 2 months ago. He was killed in action. He was a major in the Maglan unit, the Commando Battalion, and he saved many lives on the 7th of October. Saving lives is the topic of my talk. I would like to start by citing one sentence from the book of Pearl Benish, To Vanquish the Dragon. She wrote about two women, Tzila Orlin and Tila Rinder, who were Haredi women who served as nurses in the hospital of the women's camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And so she describes the actions in the camp. Little is known about these two women who, by the way, survived Auschwitz and immigrated to Israel after the war and became famous Rebbetzeh and teachers in the Beit Yaakov Ulpana. So Pearl Benish wrote, even in Birkenau, the kingdom of darkness in which the devil reigned during the day and terror ruled in the night, the light of a few lonely stars has driven away much of the darkness. So these are two of these lonely stars. And today I would like to talk about another one, another lonely star, Bella Chazan, who also was imprisoned in Auschwitz and served most of the time. She was over 2 years in Auschwitz, to be exact, 26 months, and about 20 months of this period she served as a nurse in the hospital or in the infirmary of the women's hospital in Birkenau. I will start with a brief sketch of her biography. She was born in 1922 in a small town called Rozhizh in the Volyn district. It was Poland at the time. It's Ukraine today. A family of 8 siblings. Her father died when she was 6 years old, and the family was Orthodox but very Zionist. So the mother sent her boys and girls to study in Tarbut Hebrew school. They spoke Hebrew and Yiddish at home. And once she finished elementary school, her mother wanted her to have some kind of a vocation. So she sent her to Ort Vocational School in Kovel to become a seamstress. And in addition to that, the boys and girls were very active in Zionist youth movements, and Bella Chazan was a member of a Chalutz Tza'ir, which eventually became known as the Dror movement after uniting with another youth movement, Freiheit. And she participated in seminars and summer camps, and we can see her here in summer camp August 9, 1939, 3 weeks before the outbreak of World War II in Europe, and you can see her sitting with her friends of the movement, enjoying their time. When the war began, the Germans invaded Poland, and they took Bendin within 3 days. Bendin was very close to the southern Poland, very close to the German border. And after a few weeks, when these kids, they saw that the Germans are killing Jews and burning synagogues and homes, they decided to flee like many other Jews in this part of Poland, and they fled east towards the Soviet occupation zone. And they actually took a long trip, 1,000 kilometers long, in order to get to Vilna, because Vilna at that time was a part of Lithuania, free Lithuania, and there was hope that from Vilna one can get certificates or at least find ways to get to Palestine, which was Bella's dream. She wanted to be a chalutza in a kibbutz in Palestine. So she got to Vilna and she joined the Shacharia kibbutz in Vilna, and they had a seminar during the Lithuanian occupation of Vilna. They could act freely as a Zionist, and here is a picture, a photo taken near the apartment where they stayed in Vilna. But then the Russians took over in October 41, and that is 40, and of course Zionist movement was not legal under Russian rule, and then the Germans came in June 41, Barbarossa operation, and everything changed. They started killing Jews at Ponari forest in Vilna, and the group went underground. And when they went put into the ghetto of Vilna, my mother assumed a Polish identity, Brodyslava Limanowska, and she became a courier for the Dror underground. And she performed many acts of courage and heroism together with her friends, Lonka Kozhibrodska, Thema Schneiderman, and others. I have no time to tell about them, but you can listen to a podcast by Helena Bonham Carter, the actress, and in the BBC, Bella Khazan and the Jewish Resistance. You simply Google Bella Khazan and BBC, and you can hear very nicely a description of some of her activities in the underground. Unfortunately, in June 1942, she was captured by the Gestapo. She was taken to Gestapo headquarters at Al Ashukha 25, a very famous building, and she was tortured, but of course she didn't tell anything. And then she was sent to Pawiak prison, the notorious prison in the middle of Warsaw. Quite an unpleasant place to stay. There were selections, executions, maltreatment, starvation, and so and so. And she stayed in that hospital, in that prison, for about 5 months, and then she was deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. I would like to spend a few minutes on the structure of Auschwitz. You know that Auschwitz was actually a complex of many camps. The main camp, Auschwitz I, is shown here, and not far from this camp, about 2.5 kilometers, is Birkenau, where the main extermination, the industrial extermination of the Jewish people took place. And the green lines depict the part of the Birkenau complex, which became the women's camp. Next to the Auschwitz main camp, there's also a small camp, quite unknown, which is called the extension camp of Auschwitz I. And in 1943 and 1944, a few blocks in this extension camp became also part of the women's camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. If we look at the main women's camp in Birkenau, let's say in the middle of 1943, we can see that it had a huge hospital, about 1/4 of the camp, about 15 to 17 blocks. This is an air photo taken by American planes. And so this is the hospital, and the entrance was somewhere here, and it was surrounded by a gate. You had to go through a gate. It was surrounded by a fence, and you had to go through a gate in order to enter the place. And the gate, of course, was guarded. There were other blocks which belonged to the hospital, and I would like to point especially block number 25. Block number 25 in the years 1942 and 1943 was called the death block. And why was it called such? Because when selections were made in the camp, and particularly in the hospital, the women that were selected for the gas chamber, here is one of the gas chambers in crematorium number 2, and the women were taken to block 25, and they waited in that block until it was full, and then they were transported. Here's a photo of block 25, and then they were transported to the gas chambers. Eventually, this block became a part of the hospital, which I will refer to later. So Bella Khazan came to Birkenau in November 1942, and she went through the registration process. She was shaved and stripped and washed and disinfected and tattooed and photographed. And here we can see the mugshot of prisoner Bronislawa Limanowska, which was the Polish name she used throughout her incarceration in Birkenau. First, she was sent to an Außenkommando, that is to a working group outside the camp. Außenkommandos used to work in construction of various buildings, like the crematorium in this case. This is a drawing by David Oller, an ex-Sonderkommando member. And they were sent also to agricultural work. This is a drawing by Naomi Jutkowski. And the life expectancy in Außenkommandos was 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe 1 month. And Bella Khazan realized that, and she managed somehow to persuade the camp commandant, Maria Mendel, to send her as a nurse, to work as a nurse in the women's hospital, women's infirmary, which was called, in the camp, it was called the Revier of the women's camp. This is, by the way, block 25, and the women which are destined for the gas chambers. When this block is full, the women are loaded on a truck, and then they are taken to the crematoria and dumped in the entrance of the crematoria like you dump gravel. And I will get to that later. If we look at the hierarchy, functional hierarchy of the hospital, you have the SS doctors. Mengele is the most known one, but there were others, and they were actually, did not treat the patients at all. The main function they had is to come once or twice or 3 times a week to the hospital and make selections and get rid of those patients which seemed unable to go back to work. Or another reason they came to the hospital was to prevent the spread of epidemics, like typhus epidemic. Then they would come and send a whole block or several blocks to the gas chambers in order to eradicate the epidemic. Under the doctors, there were SS sanitars. Also, they did not treat the patients. They used to fill documents for the doctor, sign death certificates, and one more function of these sanitars was to kill patients, whether it be women or newborns, with phenol injections into the heart. So who ran the camp, the hospital? The hospital was run by prisoner functionaries. The top positions were that of the River Lager Alteste. She was the administrative top position of the hospital, and then there was the medical administrator, the chief doctor, and these 2 ladies served most of the time of the hospital, Orly Wald and Anna Weiss. And under them were the block Alteste, the chief block doctors, and under them there were the doctors, nurses, orderlies, technicians, and so on. And these functionary prisoners, they ran the operation in the hospital. But the hospital, as evidenced by many survivors of Auschwitz who stayed in the hospital, they all described the same thing. The conditions in the hospital were terrible. The sheets were soiled with excrements and the blankets were covered with lice. There was no medicine in the hospital at all, and the patients had no access to toilets or washing facilities. Every 3 days there was a selection. The selected women were taken to block 25. They stayed in this block sometimes 10 days, even longer, without food or drink, and then they were sent to the gas chambers. So Bella Khazan came to the hospital, and of course her impression was the same. She wrote in her memoirs, I failed to mention, when Bella Khazan came to Palestine in December 1945, she sat down for an entire month and wrote a full memoir of her experiences during the war. And this is why we have a lot of knowledge about what happened to her and to others in the hospital. So she wrote that the number of patients in the infirmary was beyond its possible capacity. The lice that sucked the inmates' blood spread endlessly, and with them spread the epidemic contagious diseases. One ward would house perhaps 100 patients, and the one nurse assigned to them could not provide the care they required. And then she was sent to a mixed ward. There were Jews on one side and non-Jews on the other side. And as she wrote, there were separate wards for Jews and non-Jews. The Polish nurses, so she wrote, refused to work in the Jewish wards. They kept the Jewish patients with wounds oozing with pus and blood without applying a bandage for days, until worms began to hatch and wriggle in the wounds. The women died of that, of course. And one should remember that Bella Khazan, under the name of Bronislawa Limanowska, was a Polish nurse. Everybody regarded her as a Polish nurse, and she had to hide her identity, otherwise she could get killed. So nonetheless, she wrote, my heart was crushed within me that as a Polish girl, I was not assigned to that ward, to the Jewish ward. Yet I tried to help the Jews as much as I could. For example, when I brought the vats of soup means some kind of a diluted liquid with peels of potatoes floating or sinking. And so when I brought the vats of soup from the kitchen, I put those with the thicker soup by the Jewish ward and those with the thinner soup by the non-Jews. And one must remember that as she said, Jews were not treated in the hospital, and also the food rations were smaller, and they could not enjoy, unlike Polish and German inmates, they could not enjoy parcels that were sent to non-Jews by family members, friends, and all kinds of helpful organizations like the Patriot in Poland. So they were in poorer condition, and she wanted to help them. She called them the daughters of my people. As my distress grew, I went to the head nurse, a Pole, and said, in nursing school, I was taught that all patients are equal. The nurse replied, I do not help the dirty Jews, but if you pity them, why don't you go and work in their ward? Which is exactly what she wanted. How happy I was, she wrote, when I could lay my hand on the brow of a sick Jewish woman, feed her, bring a spoonful of water to her lips. The Jewish patients said in wonderment, what an excellent Goya. These praises broke my heart as I was forced to hide my true identity. So this is one story of her service in the hospital. Another one is the story of the scabies epidemic. At that time, scabies, by the way, is a skin disease caused by mite. It can be easily treated with a proper cream, but in conditions of density and the lack of hygiene, it becomes a very dangerous epidemic. It spreads through the camp due to the unclean conditions and lack of sanitary provisions. Scabies was far more prevalent among the Jews. This is because the Jews could not get soap like the Polish prisoners, and they were in poorer condition. This was a serious, dangerous medical condition causing lethal infections if left untreated. In the hospital, during the scabies epidemic, one block was especially reserved for scabies patients. This was the notorious death block. In 1942-43, it held camp inmates who had been designated for extermination by gassing. Now it was called the Kratze block. Kratze means scratching because scabies causes itching sensation, and the patients scratch themselves, and in this way, the injuries are contaminated. So Bella said, I decided I would be most helpful to the Jewish women if I would work in the Kratze block. Also, I was fed up with living among the Polish nurses and hearing their anti-Semitic remarks all the time. So again, she approached the doctor and told her that I want very much to work in the Kratzer block. I presented myself as a professional nurse, as before the war I treated this condition, and she agreed to my request. I came to the Kratzer block. The patients, among them young girls, 14 or 15 years old, had deep wounds, actual holes in their flesh. They were treated with a sort of liquid that gave off a terrible odor. I should mention that treating scabies is with a sulfur cream, which has a terrible odor. And at that time, it was called Metigel, produced by the Bayer pharmaceutical industries, and it was sometimes available in the camp. Water wasn't to be found in this block. In the Kratzer block, I worked devotedly from morning till night. She was the only nurse there. I was so involved with the patients that at times I'd hear them say in Yiddish, "This one Gentile woman could redeem 100 Jews." By being in the Kratzer block, I could also organize some of the liquid used to treat the condition and bring it to the Jewish blocks to treat those affected so that they wouldn't be sent to the scabies block. Dr. Mengele would come every so often to the Kratzer block to conduct a selection. I ordered one young woman to stand nearest the entrance to the block to warn us when he approaches the block. Then we would attempt to hide the worst affected patients. To the doctor, we showed only the mildest cases. I found a memoir of Ada Rosenzweig. Later, she was called Gershoni. She immigrated to Israel, and she met Bella Chazan in the camp. In the Birkenau camp, I got scabies between the fingers. My block attester took me out of the block and put me in the block of the condemned. Block of the condemned, that's the block 25. The nurse, I'm not sure, but I think she was a Jewess. She brought me an ointment against the scabies. Before Mengele came for a selection, she took me back to the block where my sister was housed. That's how I survived. The next and final story I would like to tell is about being a nurse in the Auschwitz extension camp, which I mentioned before. This is a photo of these blocks in the extension camp, and 3 or 4 of these blocks were designated as a women's camp, and in one of the block there was a little infirmary. So when Chazan was sent to this camp, she was appointed as a nurse in that infirmary, and the physician-in-chief was a Polish woman doctor who had previously served in the Birkenau hospital and recognized me, so she wrote. She explained that she lacked a blokova. Blokova is a blockal tester. It's the head of a block, because she couldn't work with the previous one, a Jewish woman. She asked me whether I would undertake this position, being a Polish, so to say, nurse. I was lukewarm about this offer. I consoled myself with us being able to serve as an example to the other blokovas while helping the sick inmates more than I could as a simple nurse. The hospital ward was a huge hall with the Gentile women on one side and the Jewish women on the other. My job was to take care of both the same, while my heart was drawn to the daughters of my people. My desire was to help them more, but I lived in fear that the Polish women would notice this and immediately begin to shout about it. Nonetheless, whenever I had some food remaining, I would go after lights out to the beds of the Jewish patients and portioned it out to them when none could see. I went from one bed to another, addressing an old woman, stroking a young one, trying to inspire a hopeless case with faith, and so on. She served in that hospital, and then came December 44, Hanukkah. The Jewish women working in the hospital asked me for permission, which I gave them, to celebrate their holiday. They gathered in one of the rooms. They made pancakes of a sort and lit the first candle of Hanukkah. I should mention that the conditions in those blocks were very were much better than compared to the blocks in Birkenau, because they were built under the intention that they will serve the SS and not prisoners. So they had running water, they had toilets, and they were much better, and the chances to survive there was much higher. So these Jewish women, they invited me to sit among them. They sang songs in Yiddish and Hebrew, and one of them said, "What a pity that our Blokova doesn't understand our language. These are such beautiful songs." I felt that I'd immediately burst out weeping. I excused myself and blessed them that they will celebrate their next holidays in freedom. I remained in the block, walking around nearby, listening to their soft singing. The memory of the days of Hanukkah in my family's home stood before my eyes. So these are a few excerpts from her memoirs about her experiences in the infirmary, in the hospital of the women's camp, and I have no time to talk about other amazing stories, and I hope that in the book that I hope to publish soon, one can read much more about her amazing activities. I would like to summarize by telling what happened after Auschwitz was evacuated. So my mother gathered, Bella Chazan gathered the sick patients who could walk during the evacuation of Auschwitz. They went on the death march, and then they reached Ravensbrück, and then the women's camp in Malchow, which was a subcamp of Ravensbrück. And she stayed there as a nurse again in the infirmary for 2 months. And then as the Russians approached Ravensbrück and Malchow, they were sent further west to Leipzig, and she was imprisoned in the Taucher Leipzig women's camp. And here I should mention on April 18th, together with Dr. Alexander Herman and other people who worked in the infirmary, she orchestrated what is described as a courageous Holocaust rescue, saving 140 patients from a killing squad of the SS that came to liquidate the camp and kill all the patients. And you can read about that in an article in Haaretz, which I wrote in 2020, published in 2020. Her liberation day was April 1945. From Germany, she moved to Brussels, to Belgium. Then she reached Paris. In Paris, she met soldiers of the Jewish Brigade who took her to a DP camp in Italy. She stayed in Italy for several months. And then on November 9th, 1945, she arrived on a boat from Italy to Haifa, Palestine. A year later, she married Chaim, whom she met in Italy. He was a soldier in the British Army, and they had 2 kids. This is my sister Esther, and this is me in 1954. She died in the year of 2004, and posthumously she received the Jewish Rescuer Citation given by the Bnei Brit World Organization. Jewish Rescuer Citation has been conferred in recognition of the devotion, courage, and heroism exhibited by Bella Ya'ari Chazan in rescuing fellow Jews during the Holocaust. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Yoel. I'm almost speechless after this story. Thank you to both our speakers. I would like to bring you both for a quick, very short panel discussion. It would be interesting to talk to both of you about a few ideas around the term of solidarity and what drew you personally to the subject. And if anyone has a question you would like to pose to both of our speakers, please put it in the chat box. Yoel, you just ended with explaining what drew you to the topic. I would love to hear if you have anything else to add to your personal connection and your own journey around it. We will start with Dr. Bause asking you, and then going back to you, Yoel, again to both of you. What drew you to the topic of women and solidarity and rescue stories, and the topic of our conversation? Dr. Bause.
Thanks, Ronit. So for me, the journey of my doing PhD in Holocaust studies began with the realm of science. But I ended up taking English literature, where I discovered the transformative power of the words. And then my fascination deepened as I delved into the realm of war literature during my master's. And there, amidst the narratives of conflict and courage, I began to perceive the profound interplay between science and literature, particularly in the exploration of trauma. And it was through my exploration of PTSD that I was drawn to this haunting specter of the Holocaust. And then, once I enrolled in my PhD, the Holocaust studies became not just an academic endeavor, but also deeply a personal quest to bear witness to the unspeakable horrors of history. And I think having this topic of solidarity, it has, in a way, shaped of my own belief as well, because it demonstrates the power of unity, resilience, and compassion. It also instills in you the sense of empathy and the importance of standing together in crisis. And it also demonstrates the strength of human connection and the wonders that it can work. And this actually made me research more about India and its role during the Holocaust. And I was very surprised that I did find a handful of examples. For instance, there was a Maharaja in 1945 who gave refuge to 1,000 Polish children, and is famously known as the Oscar Schindler of India. And then there was also the story of Princess Noor Inayat that I read, who was of Indian descent, and then she fought the Nazis. So that was it all about. And then I was also in touch with people and the families who helped in the liberation of the camps. And one such incident, a little anecdote that I would like to share with you, was I was in touch with Colonel Leonard Burney's son. And Colonel Leonard Burney was the one who helped in the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen. And he shares his story in his memoir, and he says, when we distributed the packets of food and little other things to the prisoners, while the men ate the biscuits, the women, the first thing they cared for was their looks. And the first thing they did was to apply lipsticks. And then he talks about the humanizing power of lipsticks. Because the first thing they cared for was their looks, and the last thing they deposited before entering the camps was their jewelry. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. And Yoel, what made you embark on this journey in 2017?
Actually, even earlier, 2015. Well, something happened. I cannot say exactly what, because that would be a terrible spoiler for my upcoming book. But something happened. And even though, of course, I was aware of my mother's biography, and actually, she didn't speak much. And I was not aware about her memoirs until 1990. That is 45 years after she wrote them, and I was about 40 years old or something like that. And I read them, and they were actually published as a book, which did not draw much attention. And at that time, I did not realize the bravery and the courage and the humanity that were guided her throughout the war. I was busy with raising family and career-wise and so on. And as I said, in 2015, something happened. And
we'll have to read your book.
You will have to read the book. But that drew me, just like the book, just went into my head. And ever since, I've been searching, unfortunately too late, because there was nobody to ask specific questions. I had to search and travel around the world in archives and so on. And but ever since 2015, I was searching about her story and discovered amazing things which she never told, and they were completely unknown, like the Taucha rescue action, which I found documents in Leipzig Memorial for Forced Labor. I have to thank my friend Anja Kruse, who supplied me with a lot of documents. I hope she is within the audience, and so on. And that led me, once I collected so much data, I said, of course, I have to write a book. And I started writing in 2018, and now the book is in press. So
congratulations. Really, and we look forward to reading it. Sorry, I stopped you. You wanted to complete the sentence?
No, that's small.
That's it. So if we circle back to the topic of solidarity, and I want to take you away, but connected to the personal level. How and if this term of, and as I said, so we'll talk a lot about solidarity, compassion, coming together, sisterhood, brotherhood. How does this term influence, on a personal level, your life today, if you're willing to share with us?
I must say that I have been impacted by the term solidarity to a great extent. And because in India, we do not have a proper curriculum for Holocaust studies. So, and I being an English educator, so the term solidarity has led me to think that there are other bonds through which I can teach Holocaust literature. And last year, when I was selected as a scholar in residence at the Oxford University, we devised a curriculum by the end of the 2-week intense workshop. And I devised a curriculum on how I would teach British English literature that is majorly taught in the universities here in India, how I would teach the Holocaust literature through that. Because when I teach Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, the character of Shylock, and when he utters the lines, we are Jews, do we not bleed? If you cut us, do we not bleed? If you spit on us, do we not get hurt? That is such a heavily loaded line for me, but not for my students. And they ask innocent questions. Why is he behaving in such a way? Is that even the thing to ask? So solidarity, yes, it has made a great impact in my life at a personal level. And I'm now devising ways how to teach the concept of solidarity and the Holocaust through other ways, through Indian connections, through English literature, etc.
Thank you. And Professor Yari?
I mean, in Israel, to speak about solidarity is almost not necessary, because we know, we see nowadays. I mentioned my son-in-law who was killed, and during the time of the Shiva, my daughter was covered with so many friends, girlfriends and friends from the army and soldiers who were under his command and so on. And this was extremely helpful for her and for us to pass these terrible days. And this continues until today. I think this is a principle that we live with. And also my upbringing, my mother, all the years, I mean, so solidarity was a principle of life for her. She would volunteer to work with blind people, read them books. She would volunteer in hospital. She would distribute clothes and food to people in need. And of course, this affected me very much, and I try to live according to this principle, to treat others as equal, to be mindful and attentive to other people, to be generous, to provide emotional support to people in need. That's a way of life, and that's how I try to educate my children as well.
Thank you. I'm wondering if the audience has any question, since our speakers are willing to open themselves to the personal level, the topic, the situation in Israel, your own personalities. I'm wondering if the audience has any question. Madine, would you like to read one of the questions out loud?
Hi, Shalom. First of all, Yoel, people are asking about your book. I think we should at least get details about the name of the book and what language it's going to be published so people can look for it. So, first of all, if you have details that we can put in the chat box.
Okay.
A lot of people are asking.
So the book will be first published in Hebrew. So it will be available to the Hebrew readers, hopefully in mid-April or so. And the title would be, in English, it would be Portrait of a Woman, Diokan Isha. You can guess who the woman is if you heard my talk. And it will be published by Kinneret Zmora Bitan. And I don't want to do promotion here, but it's written as a detective story, and the secret of why I became involved in the whole story will appear somewhere along the book, not at the beginning. If I answered your question.
Yes, you have, and hopefully in the future it will be translated to the other
I'm already looking for
parts of the world.
So
yes.
if anybody has a recommendation, I will be willing to accept.
Okay, so Madine, if there's one question you can pose to the panel, please go ahead. If not, we'll summarize and send Dr. Bause to sleep. It is 2 a.m. there, and we appreciate you being with us till now.
Yeah, I think
I
there's
can
one
see a
question. Yeah.
By Maria, and the question is that why do you think there is not such great emphasis on teaching the Holocaust in India? That's really interesting. So the reasons are multifold. India during the Holocaust years was deeply enmeshed with its own freedom struggle, and so the people here think that the Holocaust was an alien event, happened in a very far off land, so why should we be concerned? Another case to bring in solidarity. And then, strangely enough, there is this growing popularity of Adolf Hitler in India. You have merchandise, and there is a website called Colorpur that sells Hitler merchandise, and those are becoming quite popular here. And you have T-shirts, you have parlors, you have salons named after the person. And the reason for that is because in the school textbooks, the NCERT, the National Curriculum for Education, Research and Training, it's the standard book recommended for all people in the schools. That has made quite a positive image of Hitler, like he was a savior of German nation. And we should understand that students having read this, and there's practically no mention of the Holocaust there. We do have a mention, it's just mentioned thrice, once in the title, and it's just described as mass killing with no other reference. And these are the students who then come to the university level. And it's very hard to deconstruct that image. So these are a couple of reasons that Holocaust education is not so prevalent here in India.
Thank you. I would like to, we will end this short conversation by thanking both of you. It's interesting that you both came from a scientific background, actually, and embarked on this journey, teaching us all about the importance, how extremely important it is to learn more about the narratives, women's narratives, and how important they are in shaping our understanding of history. thank you both. And in closing, I would like to show back the invitation that we've sent out and use that as kind of a glimpse into our museum, explain why this was the image that we selected. This is actually a statue that is located at the museum's gallery, which is called the Hall of Camps, that tells not only the story of the camps, but just like both our speakers today discussed the struggles that prisoners had, and while trying to keep alive, to help one another, and to make sure they survive to tell their stories. That's what the gallery deals with. And one of the artifacts in this gallery is what you see in front of you, a statue by Elsa Pollack called Sharing the Soup Bowl, the bowl of soup. I don't think I need to say much about that after hearing our wonderful speakers today, Professor Yoel Yaari and Dr. Mehak Bursa. So I would like to conclude by thanking you both again for a fascinating talk. I'm sure we could have stayed here for 2 more hours and continue the conversation. And I'm sure you all join me in saying that we have heard stories today that offer invaluable lessons about empathy, about compassion, about strength, that remind us that it's important to continue listen, learn, and uplift the voices of women whose stories have often been overlooked. And Yoel's book will do justice to that matter exactly. Thank you all for joining us in this important conversation. And I wish each of us and all of us peaceful days ahead.
Thank you.
זו הייתה אהבה ממבט ראשון, האור סינוור את החדר, ממנהרת החושך יצאתי אלייך, הגעתי הביתה, אל החום, אל התום, אל יופך עצום, אל הכתף המנחמת, ובסוף כל יום איתך הולך לישון, אין לי אף אחת אחרת, אבל משהו קרה לנו, משהו נסדק, משהו מרחיק בינינו, כבר לא נדבק, צועקים, לא שומעים, מתפוצצים, אוכלים דבש עם קוצים, אני לא מוותר עלינו, לא בורח, איך שוב נתקרב, אני את הדלת פותח, תסתכלי לי בעיניים, ככה ממש מולי, לפני שנתמוסס, דברי אליי, דברי.
מחברים מחדש, לאן הלכנו, איך מחברים מחדש אותנו ביחד.
מסך עשן מילא את החדר בערפל כבד, חיפשתי אותך, חיפשתי כוחות להתמודד, הזמן עובר כמו כביש שאין לו סוף, ונדמה לי רגעים שאיבדנו את עצמנו בתוך שערה שלא בא לה לחלוף. חיפשנו משהו, איך לשנות המצב, לעמוד מול זה במקום לסובב זה לזוז זה לזה את הגב. תסתכלי לי בעיניים, בואי נשנה גישה, מה שלא יבוא עלינו יישארי כנה. אנה
לי אנה הלכנו, אנה השמי עיקון, אנה אנו באים, כמה הרחקנו, אנה נלך מפה.
אנה, אנה אנחנו, לאן הלכנו, איך מחברים מחדש. לחפש אחרי